the best practice is your practice. Sorry, that's the bad news and the good news. Easiest student, hardest student is going to be you. If you want calm, mindful, compassionate kids, you have to actually surround them with mindful, compassionate, well-regulated adults.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. My guest is Dr. Chris Willard. He is a Harvard Medical School faculty and author, a psychologist, a mindfulness and emotion management guy. And I'm excited to get into an interesting conversation. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
I am too. Thank you for having me. And I know we had a little back and forth with scheduling and some symptoms of various people's ADD, maybe mine, as we got scheduled, but here we are. So I'm so excited to actually
It might happen in our communities.
Funny.
We also discovered as we were kind of planning this that we both went to the same alma mater. So we've got some background in common. It'll be interesting to see where we go forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's start with, tell us a little bit about how you came to be doing this work. You've written books, you talk about emotional resilience. What brought you into this realm?
Yeah, growing up, my mom was a psychologist. So I like to joke, Dr. Willard is my mom's name. Please call me Chris. And so I'd always kind of resonated with that seems like a job that is really helpful to people and is very kind of verbal and about storytelling in many ways, and also has science and other components to it, and has a lot of integrity. And so I always thought that was cool, that I'd either be a writer or a therapist or a teacher when I grew up. And
now you're all of the above.
I know, and I can't believe how lucky I feel that that I am, in fact, all of the above. And so I was an English major and I was I'm going to write the great American novel. And, that didn't exactly work out, but I get to write about other things that I'm passionate about and indulge my creative side in writing. And I also find even just being a therapist, being a psychologist, being a teacher in all those ways really indulges my creative side too. And so I just feel so lucky, as we were chatting before, we started recording, just how is this my life? This is so cool. I get to talk to interesting people on podcasts. I get to travel different places and speak about things I love, like mindfulness and resilience and emotions and mental health and wellness and all this kind of stuff. And I get to help people one-on-one, and I get to teach in other ways. It's just, so it's been a blast. So my story is I got started, in college, actually, where we both went. I had a pretty hard time, actually, with some mental health stuff, substance abuse, undiagnosed ADHD. Took a few years off to kind of find myself or get my shit together, however you put that. And during that time, I had a year where I just sort of fell apart. And then another year where I ended up going on a mindfulness retreat, basically because my parents didn't know what to do with me. They kind of dragged me. And it was really transformative for me. It was things make sense. I feel connected. I feel happier. I feel calmer, more peaceful, and your mileage may vary, but for me, it was totally transformative. After that, I got sober. I've been sober for a few decades at this point. I, started practicing meditation regularly. I went back to school, finished my degree. From there, I actually worked as a special education teacher in a very challenging environment, inpatient residential school. And then was this job is really hard. Those therapists have a good job. I'm going to go be a therapist. That seems much easier. And some ways easier, some ways harder. But grad school and then my dissertation, I was I'll be damned if this just sits on a shelf. And I actually got How to Get Your Book Published for Dummies. And I did what it said. And I wrote a first book, and then it worked, and I wrote more, and then I did some speaking, and then it just sort of just started going from there. And so I love that I get to do all these things. It works with my brain. I didn't really realize I had ADHD myself until a couple of years ago. My son, who was maybe 9, we were on vacation, and he says, "Hey, Dad, what's ADHD?" And I was like, "Well, let me go get my DSM." And I pull it out and I start reading the symptoms. What are there, 12 symptoms? And my wife just cracking up. And she's like, well, Leo's got like 11 of the 12, but Chris, you've got like 10 of them.
Right.
Like, oh. I don't walk around as if on a motor, but everything else is little accurate. So it's been a journey and continues to be one.
That is a journey. So there are a lot of pieces to the story, even before we get to, what you're focusing on now. So because you are this beautiful tale of struggle and success, right? And a lot of parents in our community, I would say, we support parents of kids of all ages with a particular expertise of parents of older teens and young adults. Mm-hmm. Because the story you describe is a pretty common scenario, whether there's a diagnosis or not, that kind of hitting a wall, leaning into coping mechanisms that may not be helpful or healthy,
right?
And really flailing for a while.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you think back to that experience, like what stands out from you now that you would tell your younger self?
Yeah. I mean, I remember my parents went to go meet with a family therapist, and I guess who gave them the advice of, they're like, he was like, the number one rule of parenting is never give up. And I just feel so grateful that my parents did not, in fact, give up when I was having some really dark times and I was making some really bad choices when I was in really, really bad shape. They kept loving me. They kept supporting me. They also did that with boundaries, which is also really important and can be really hard when you just love your kid, but you're kind of smothering them in other ways or enabling other things that aren't so helpful. And I have to say, it's like, I feel so lucky. And also, the older I get, the more I think about the word luck and how much oftentimes that kind of means privilege. It's like, here I am, like a white guy from the suburbs. Like, some of it's luck that I was lucky. And a lot of it is just like circumstance. And my parents had resources. And because my mom was a therapist, she knew a lot of where to get resources. And now there is so much less stigma. It is so much more common for young people and for families to get help. Almost every parent that calls me to get help for their kid is like, I told him I've got my therapist, or I told her, like, mom and dad are doing their work too. And it's so normalized, which is, I think, great. But there's still so many people that haven't gotten that diagnosis that kind of helps them make sense of their life or been able to access the support that they need when it is still enormous waiting lists, enormously expensive to get mental health help, to get coaching help, to get learning help. I mean, all these kinds of things, accommodations that are actually helpful as opposed to just keep kids treading water or even, kind of sinking in other ways. So it's, I feel lucky in many ways. And part of what I want to do is kind of help more people access good tools, good information, all of this kind of thing. Because it's hard to come by.
Yeah, it can be. And to your point, there's a great awareness around and a debunking of the stigma. Mm-hmm. And yet it's still there, and yet access to services is still there. And what strikes me, one of the things that strikes me in your story is that there you were getting educated, a special ed teacher, and you still have your own undiagnosed issues. Mm-hmm. That even as you were living it and supporting other kids, you still weren't yet understanding how to apply it to yourself. Is that?
Absolutely. And there also, I think for some people, not everybody, but with some issues or neurodivergences or whatever it might be, are really able to kind of muster their resources to support other people and then can't do them in their own life. Like I was doing executive function tutoring all through graduate school for other people, but could I keep my own calendar in order? No. And then kind of realizing, oh, okay, here's what it is. I have my own totally wackadoodle systems that no one else would be able to understand, but they do work for me. But it is kind of amazing how we, in some ways, gravitate, toward we teach what we need to know, oftentimes even before we know that we need to know it. So it's amazing. Yeah.
So let's take a quick break and then let's come back and talk about sort of how your career moved into mindfulness and emotional resilience.
Absolutely. Okay? Sounds good.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At Dig Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. To learn more, go to digcoaching.com/impact.
So welcome back, everybody. My guest is Chris Willard, and we are talking about the journey of the classic neuro-spicy person who is a bright young adult, kind of faltered a little bit before finding your path, which I think happens to a lot of kids in our community. And then even as you found your path, hadn't yet figured out the need to apply it to yourself. You talked about going on a mindfulness retreat, and that has clearly led you into doing work with mindfulness and emotional regulation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was, again, sort of during this time off from school, my parents didn't know what to do with me. And basically, they'd gotten interested in this stuff, probably because of their own stress, not related to being my parents.
Okay.
And they dragged me along, and it was with someone named Thich Nhat Hanh. This is in 1999 or 2000.
Wait, you went to a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh?
I did. Yep.
So everybody, those of you who read the book, there's a quote from him in every chapter of my book.
Oh my gosh, what? Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Like these parallel.
Huge fan.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was just, it really just kind of blew my mind and blew my heart open in a sense also, all at the same time. And just, in a little bit, a religious experience, but kind of like, this is amazing. I'm going to teach everybody mindfulness. There'll be world peace in 5 years. And, it didn't quite work out that way. But that in fact, like there was something about seeing how much this could be helpful for me when I was young, and then wanting to find ways, could this be adapted for young people? How could we teach this stuff to kids so maybe they don't take quite the shorter journey than I took? And so that just really excited me. And that became a little bit of my work in graduate school. I kind of tried some experiments when I was a teacher, just didn't, they kind of mostly flopped. And it was right when mindfulness and these kinds of practices were really getting more popular, getting more research behind them, kind of early 2000s, late 2000s. And so I also feel really lucky I kind of got, in the right place at the right time. But amazing research now on the brain, on ADHD, on depression, on anxiety, even on trauma, on so many different things that I think are so helpful and really, beyond the point of mainstream to the point of, probably even some backlash towards some of these ideas, mostly I think around misunderstandings of what some of these things can mean. But and what's been amazing is just being able to draw from my experience, but not like project my own experience onto other people, but just, being able to help and then drawing from like the wisdom of Thich Nhat Hanh, the wisdom of other just incredible mindfulness teachers out there. And then with the science just really coming through in the last 15 years around it, 20 years around it, it's just so incredibly exciting. So, and then I've had fun, as I said, just being able to, writing books for little kids, as well as writing books for teenagers or for parents, and just trying to like, how do we make this fun? And for me, I thought so long, it has to look like Thich Nhat Hanh. It has to be perfectly still and graceful and quiet and silent and maybe the slightest bit of smile. And that is great. But at the same time, how can we bring a little bit more joy to this and maybe even some silliness and humor? So trying to bring that in to the mindfulness world and into education, where there's also just so much seriousness sometimes. And like, how do I take my work seriously, my clients seriously, my students seriously, but not take myself quite so seriously? I think is important.
I get that. I had a supervisor once who said to me, not every conversation has to be significant. And it was some of the best advice I ever got, really, was, and I think part of what we do at Impact, it's about, we're dealing with serious issues and we have to hold it lightly because that's what allows us to be with some of the complexity that we deal with that sometimes can be really hard. What your parents went through with you going through the journey you went through, that was not easy.
Right.
And they had to figure out how to be with that, and they had to figure out how to navigate it and to not lose hope. And so to do that and do it lightly is a gift, I think, to bring.
Yeah. It so much is. And I'm working on some new writing. And one of the sample chapters I sent out was about the neuroscience of humor. And it was so fun just to like do research on that, like what jokes do, and even more than being funny, like being good humored, basically, like being an easy laugh. Like when someone tells even a corny joke, when you laugh, like what that does to everybody's nervous system, what that does to everybody's brain for getting out of that locked in place, getting into a more playful place where creativity emerges, where new solutions to seemingly intractable problems can start to come through. It's amazing actually just what humor and lightness can do for a situation. And gravitas has its place too. And with some things, it really is important to keep very serious, but finding that balance and knowing how to work all of those different sides of things, I think is so important in life, in healing and helping other people for sure, as well.
So I kind of want to go two different directions. One is I just want to share with you, I don't know if you're familiar with the Institute for Play, but there's this beautiful book, and I'll share it with you later, on play, where they identify 8 or 9 different play styles. And humor is one of them, and directing is, like, there are all these, and we've done a lot of work with that with in our community, and with the professionals in our community to kind of find the play. What I'm hearing you speaking to that I really want to focus on is what you're saying, I think, underneath it all, is that mindfulness doesn't have to be counting how many times you chew or sitting in a meditative pose, in quiet. So
Yeah. I think that's so important, because I think that ends up keeping certain people out the door of, well, my kids has ADD, they'll never be able to sit still. It's like, well, let's do something that isn't about sitting still. Let's do something that's about play. Like one of my favorite, Lev Vygotsky, who some people probably know, sort of zonal proximal development, cognitive development guy. He did this study where he was trying to get, I think it was 8-year-olds to stand still. And of course he gets out his stopwatch and, 5 minutes later, the kids are running around everywhere. And he calls them back in and he says something like, stand still for as long as you can, but this time imagine you're like the guard at a factory or a knight guarding a castle. And the kids then actually stand still successfully for like 18 or 20 minutes. And so it's like tapping into imagination, making it playful, making it a game, a little bit of a competition, still activating the prefrontal cortex, still quieting down the limbic system in these different ways through play. And so when we think mindfulness, we think stillness, breathing, and we can make stillness fun. We can, be still like a ninja, play freeze tag, right? We can make breathing fun. We can do superhero breaths. We can do alligator breaths. But even that aside, it can be about, the anchor of attention doesn't have to be the breath. The anchor of attention can be play, right? And that, I feel like, just when I read that study, it just sort of turned everything inside out. And I thought about being a kid and being at like this camp where the counselors were like, we're going to go walk as silently as we can in the woods. Can you walk without making a sound? And realizing, oh, you know what? I did mindful walking on the Thich Nhat Hanh retreat, and you're just focused on each footstep and not thinking about the past or the future. That was a lot like being a kid walking silently in the woods and just focusing on each footstep and not worrying about the past or the future and just thinking about the texture of the ground underneath you. And it's like putting those things together, or listening to sounds in the quiet. And it's like, well, make it superhero listening rather than just, listen to sounds. It's like, what's the farthest sound you can hear? These things make it playful. They make it fun. And again, now that I'm 48 and look back, it's like, counselors are probably just trying to get us to shut up. And maybe they were. But at the same time, it still had this element of planting these seeds of mindfulness, this sort of amazing amount of focus through play, and through using our imagination. And so for littles, that can be just a great way to introduce this stuff. And as kids get bigger, they're not going to do butterfly breaths and ninja walks and stuff like that. But the seeds are there. And there's other things we can do with adolescents, with young adults, that are kind of still those training wheels for mindfulness, or just kind of help onto that path that may get them to at least some inner stillness, hopefully, to be able to find.
What I'm really hearing is permission to find ways to make mindfulness accessible.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Whatever that is. And for some kids, it's play. And for some kids, it's creativity. And for some kids, it's being fully present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the notion is that there isn't a right way to do mindfulness.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can bring mindful awareness to anything. And I think there's interesting questions like, oftentimes in different places, people say, well, I run, is that mindfulness? Or they'll say, fishing is my mindfulness. And it's, or is dancing mindfulness? And it's like, you can do all those things mindfully, and also mindfulness or not, whatever works for you, man. Like just, and I think we also have this Western, like, okay, we're going to take mindfulness and put it in the lab and study it. And so it's got a lot of good research. But I bet if we took dance, for other cultural practices from maybe not the dominant culture and put them in the lab, we'd probably get pretty amazing similar results about self-regulation, about nervous system regulation, emotional regulation, attentional regulation, these kinds of things that we're really trying to help ourselves and our kids and the next generations with too. So
let's draw the connection, because a lot of parents in our community and professionals in our community, we've all, as you said, we've heard the research on mindfulness. We've heard Susan Smalley speaking at a conference. Like, we get we're supposed to do it. And a lot of parents get caught up in the checklist of what am I supposed to do to help my kid, right? And so we're trying to get them out of the doing and into the how are we being in relationship with our kid. So let's correlate mindfulness, if you will, to regulation, to emotional regulation, focus regulation, the pieces you were just talking about. How does it connect?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different ways. I mean, there's so many different metaphors for kind of how do we understand how the brain and body work, right? We can do zones of regulation, and mindfulness helps us out of the, red zone and into the green zone. We can do window of tolerance from Dan Siegel, right? Mindfulness helps us access and expand that window of tolerance a little bit more. We can do hypo arousal, right? And I think these are all really pointing to the same thing, but mindfulness, and I say that a little bit as an, sort of clinical mindfulness, maybe I sort of say that as sort of an umbrella term, but things like breath work, things like visualizations, things like muscle relaxation, they're not all necessarily exactly mindfulness, but they kind of all, technically speaking, but they'll get us to this place where our nervous system is better regulated, and where our brain is regulated into a place where we can focus for the long term, we can maintain our focus, we can activate the regions of the brain that are maybe underactivated in some people, on the spectrum or with ADHD or executive function challenges or things like that. And in those ways, it ends up being really helpful. Like breathing again, and it can get an eye roll, but the fact is, even just a couple well-regulated breaths, right, can actually really send blood into the prefrontal cortex, which we know is smaller and less active, right? In a lot of the kids that we work with and worry about, like the insular cortices on the side that are a little bit more at play in social pragmatics and empathy and other things like that. So, then learning to regulate our breath, we know that we can regulate our breath. We can then regulate our body. Our nervous system is in our body. The brain is the biggest part of that. We're actually then able to regulate our emotions, our attention, and our impulses. So that's a lot of what's happening just by regulating our breath. When we practice just regulating our attention, right? I'm going to set my mind, my awareness on this piece of music, because focusing on a chant is maybe boring for some of us, right? Or the breath, right? That, I notice it wander off and I bring it back. That's really actually building the capacity of sustained attention. It's building the capacity of selective attention, where I can actually have my attention focus on what I want it to focus on, and not on the spitball going by me or the interesting conversation outside in the hallway and wishing I was out there, or, whatever it might be for someone else, or just the the kind of intolerability of a sound or a sensory thing coming at us that is so hard for some of us and some of the kids that we work with, to be able to kind of notice that and sort of set it aside and not have it be quite so agitating or frustrating to learn how to process that sensory input. So these are some of the ways it ends up making a difference. And it really is like, I've got this dad I work with. I've been kind of dining out on this story lately, but it's like, we finished up therapy for a while a few years ago, and I was like, what was the most helpful thing we did? And he was like, well, I'd drive home, park in my driveway and just take 3 breaths before I went inside. He has a very highly special needs kid who's going to be always institutionalized probably. And he was like, and then I'm not always bringing the calm, but at least I'm not bringing more chaos. And then the co-regulation can happen. And I'm not bringing my bad day in and infecting everybody with my emotional baggage for that day. And that actually, kind of brings me to the point that what research says and common sense too, it's like one of the best things we can do for kids is practice mindfulness ourselves. Like, great to tell them to breathe or focus on this or that, but the more well-regulated we are as adults, right? Regulation is contagious. Stress is contagious. Anxiety is contagious, but actually so is calm. So is regulation. I was a little bit like, 3 years of therapy is a lot of money just to take 3 breaths in the driveway. But at the same time, it really is like that really did make a difference, right?
Yeah.
It made a difference in the family system too, which I think is so important to remember. And yeah.
A lot of what I'm hearing you speak to is the first of all, the incremental nature of it. It's like one breath builds on the next breath, builds on the next breath, right? One day and then 2 days and 3 days. So there's the practice and the incremental tolerance extension of it that you're pointing to. And then the other thing, one of our biggest messages that I hear you reinforcing, so thank you, is, the change we want for our kids starts with us.
Yeah.
And we believe as parents, we get caught in that cycle of what else can I do? What else can I do? What should I be doing? And what you're saying is you should pay attention to how you're being with yourself and in dynamic with your kid. And that being is...
When we can respond, not react, and I, gallivant around and give talks, and people are always, what's the best practice for my kid with ADD or the best practice for my kid with a temper problem? It's like, well, the best practice is your practice. Sorry, that's the bad news and the good news. Easiest student, hardest student is going to be you. Or like, we create more mindful kids in our school. It's like, well, the best way to create stressed out kids and miserable kids is you surround them with stressed out, miserable adults. If you want calm, mindful, compassionate kids, you have to actually surround them with mindful, compassionate, well-regulated adults. And that often is like, okay.
It's hard. But on the other hand, you can't control what happens. You can control how you respond to what happens.
Right.
So we have the capacity to influence the situation by paying attention to ourselves, which is really the only thing we can do anything about anyway.
Exactly. And I think what I've learned from kind of Buddhist understandings, kind of beyond just like the mindfulness, which is only one aspect of it, is that things change under certain, with certain causes and under certain conditions. Like, we can't change someone else, but we can create the conditions under which, they're more likely to make the changes that they need to make. And to me, that's what good accommodations is. It's what good parenting is. It's, how do we, kind of like tilt it so that things like roll downhill and roll more smoothly. I don't know where I'm going with that metaphor, but like basically, it's like, what are the conditions under which this kid is likely to thrive? What are the conditions under which our family is likely to thrive as parents, that we're likely to stay together in our relationship through this really stressful time, right? How do we keep creating those conditions for success? Because we can't make success happen, but we can keep tweaking the conditions for it to be more likely.
Yeah, we do a lot of work around the tone of the home. And kind of our job as a parent is an invitation. So it speaks to that. So I hate to stop the conversation because it's fascinating, and we have to start bringing it to a close. You guys, if you want to find out more about Chris Willard, you can find him on Instagram at Dr. Chris Willard, at his webpage, drchristopherwillard.com. There's some resources there, some good downloads for you there. So go check that out. Chris, as we wrap this conversation, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you bring up to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I could talk for hours. I think I keep interrupting you too. I apologize. But I think fundamentally when it comes to mindfulness, this doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be exotic. It can be the 3 breaths in your driveway before you go in the house. It can be modeling for your kid when you're in the heat of an argument. Hey, I actually need to take 3 breaths before I come back to this conversation because it's getting heated now. And you can model that when they're young with, I'm going to take 3 breaths in this really heated Uno game right now. And then it can be, I'm going to take 3 breaths in this heated, debate we're having at the dinner table or in the car about curfews or something like that. And as long as you come back to the conversation, right, you're really modeling that stuff. Or, I'm feeling really overwhelmed by this situation at work. I need to do something to regulate myself, whether it's 3 breaths, listening to music, eating healthfully, doing a yoga posture, whatever it is that you do that's healthy, that's maybe not what I was doing in college. I don't know what you were doing in college, but finding some of those other ones that we can model, that's the best way we can teach this stuff.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. So before we wrap, do you have a favorite quote or motto that's come up to you that you want to share?
I have a couple that I put into my presentations. One is this meme I saw that says, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down. And it always is a great laugh line. But it's also like the way that we get calm, the way that, we have our kids get calm is we create the conditions for them to be calm. And that starts with us being calm, right? And so, no one's going to love it if we're like, focus on your breath, right? It's like, I'm going to focus on my breath. I will invite you into this with me. And maybe you will roll your eyes or slam the door, but that is what I can do in this moment. So that's one of my faves. Yeah.
I love that. I share with it because it always gets a laugh.
Yeah.
And everyone always knows what it means.
Yes.
Like nobody wants to hear anybody say, calm down.
Right.
Right. And yet we default to that sometimes and we do it when we don't know what else to do. And so what I'm hearing you saying is pay attention to the tools that we have at our disposal to calm ourselves down, to take the breath, to take the beat, to take the time out, and to prioritize calm so that we can be modeling and be present.
Right. Absolutely.
Great. So thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for what you're doing. It's lovely. I love that you're bringing play into it. I'm looking forward to reading more because that is, it's so important. And I think it's a great not mirroring, but blending of a lot of things that are important in family dynamics. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Truly a pleasure. To those of you listening, take a minute. Check in with yourself. What are you noticing about what came up for you during this conversation? What are you aware of? What are you taking away? Maybe what's one insight that you've got now that you weren't thinking about half an hour ago? And perhaps what's some action you want to take to bring this forward with you into your life this week? What's one shift that you might make in the coming week? And as always, friends, thank you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, your energy, your presence, your being and your doing, you make an extraordinary difference. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.